Hey, what's up everyone? This is Alex here, and today we are going to have a special video from the AntiAutello.com. So today we'll be introducing the Othello variants, and I'll cover a little more on that shortly.
AntiAutello.com. AntiAutello.com.
Now, before we jump right into the various variants of Othello, other than the usual traditional Othello, I also want to quickly give an introduction to eOtello.com. So eOtello, it's a gaming website for Othello, but it's somewhat different as opposed to the real-time kind of tournament or playing platform like PlayOK.com or Othello Quest mobile application that is being widely used today. So eOtello.com gives you the flexibility to actually play each move on a turn-based basis with your opponent, uh, up to 72 hours per move. So I think each game can last as long as 2 to 3 months if both of your opponent takes the maximum time to actually think and play each move. So I think the benefit of this is that you can really think very deeply into your concepts and try to establish what kind of move you want to play each time. And at the same time, you can play up to maybe 20 games with 20 different opponents at each time, or maybe even the same opponent, but with all the variants in the random, the Octagon, the Anti, and the GrandAutello. So, yeah, that's essentially what eOtello.com is. And of course, if you're interested, please go ahead to that website and sign up for an account. So, let's jump right into the various Othello variants today. So the first one is actually the random openings variant, or something that we know as a XOT opening, widely known across the players. So I think the first concept of this actually came up when most of the top players, or at least a few of the top players, actually found that uh, many players were kind of memorizing their openings a little too much, and then there was little fun in terms of playing an opening variant. So they wanted something that was a random opening. So in actual fact, the XOT opening is actually a opening that features a random string or a random set of 8 moves to begin with, such that it arrives at an almost even position, maybe +0 or ±2 situation based on the software. So I think Mr. Matthias Berg from Germany actually first conceptualized this, and also partner Mr. Borja Moreno from Spain, who is actually the founder of eOtello.com. So if you're interested to find out a little bit more about Mr. Matthias Berg's XOT story and also the background behind it, the link is also in the description below. And of course, for eOtello.com, I've also included a link if you want to go there to register an account and start playing a turn-based Othello experience. Please go on ahead. So today we're going to talk about this random openings variant and some basic strategies for this variant. So essentially, this variant for XOT is also played in 8x8 board and consists of the first 8 opening moves, which is randomly computer generated. So on an 8x8 board, if you have the first 8 moves together, the first 4 squares, you basically you have a total of 12 discs on the board, and therefore the remaining playing squares will be 64 minus 12, which is 52, which is a lot fewer moves that you need to play in terms of the XOT game. So if it's a blitz opening, the trade-off is that you have an unfamiliar territory or opening to play with, but you also have a little bit more time per move. So I would say that this kind of puts people out of a comfort zone, but at the same time, you can train your base strength in terms of trying to determine, what kind of move you should actually play to position yourself. So let's check out the opening sequence of this particular random opening. So this is just an example. You have the first 8 moves being moved randomly, selected by the computer, and then basically it forms up this shape. So when it starts, it always starts with black, just like the normal Othello game. And of course, as said before, the opening book knowledge can't really be used on this particular variant because unless you really play a large number of random openings, because there are at least 10,000 randomly generated openings from the computer. So I don't think human players can actually master all of these openings unless you're playing XOT 24/7. So that's an interesting point to take note. So yeah, so essentially the last point over here is about practicing your basic strategies based on and your basic concepts based on the random openings. Next, I would like to talk about the 8 stars or 88 or Octagon Othello. So basically, I think this is arguably one of the most unique variant of Othello in terms of how the board is shaped up to be like. So what happens over here is essentially we have like a 10 by 10 board, and essentially the corners and the C-squares of each corner is basically removed, and that's how you kind of get the 88 Othello board, because 100 minus 3 times 4, you get basically 12 removed from 100 and you have 88. So the interesting thing is that it's called the octagon or the 8 stars Othello is also because it has 8 corner squares. So over here, demarcated by the pink dots over here, you can see these are all the corners. So by virtue of the rules of the game, there's no way to actually go around this square. However, for this one, that is the blue one, that are demarcated as C squares, essentially this dot over here or this square over here can still be flipped between these two corners, and therefore it's not exactly a fully stable discs. So this board is actually quite interesting in the sense that it's unconventional. So you need to kind of take note of a few things. There are also the X squares, which are demarcated in yellow. And you also have this 6 by 6 central square. I think in the traditional Othello board, which is 8 by 8, we always focus on the 4 by 4 in the middle. But for this case, since the board is expanded, we follow and focus on the 6 by 6. So I would say that the priority is to remain in this 6 by 6 as much as possible. One more thing that you want to take note is that there are 4 main diagonals along this board, and also there are 4 kind of edge diagonals that are just a mini diagonal that we spoke of earlier, that the corners can still flip this square. So it may not be as impactful as opposed to the main diagonals. And of course, the edge play can be quite tricky and confusing for beginners at the start. So you might want to take care of that part and just be aware of parity and tempo for this particular board. So this again is available on the AntiAutello.com playing platform. So go ahead and try it if you wish to. Now, let's talk about the anti-Othello or the anti-Othello strategies. And basically, the anti-Othello variant is about playing the exact same size of the usual Othello, traditional Othello board size. But in this case, instead of trying to achieve more than 32 discs, for the anti-Othello, what you want to do is actually to achieve less than 32 discs. You basically want to force a loss instead of a win. So basically, losing is winning. So in this case, I would say and share some strategies. So the key to playing anti-Othello, which is forcing a loss, is actually not much difference from trying to force a win. It's all about mobility and tempo, and it's also about forcing your opponent to respond in a way that you would like to play. So the only main key difference here is that parity might be reversed. It might be better to be playing black than white because you don't have natural parity. So at the same time, you need to be kind of a bit more aware when you're playing around the corners that the C squares and X squares are no longer guaranteed as a negative position because your opponent will also try to play a negative play. So bear in mind of parity, instead of going into an odd region zone, now you want to enter an even region zone to kind of secure that you don't have parity within that zone. And at the same time, you need to force your opponent to play an early corner to give him more stable discs so that you can ensure that you might end up with fewer discs. This is kind of counterintuitive to the traditional Othello when you play this variant, but uh, to some extent, it also helps you think and train in terms of how to limit your opponent's moves and options. So I think it's basically quite a fun variant to play. You can go ahead and try it. Yeah, basically, sometimes if you can't win in winning, maybe you can win in losing. So let's move on to the next and last variant for today. So the last and final Othello variant is basically 10 by 10 GrandAutello variant. So over here you have the standard 8 by 8 board with 32 inner discs, 28 disc wall around the blue parameter, and you basically have 16 discs along the diagonals. However, if you compare that to kind of the 10 by 10 Othello board, which is also named as the GrandAutello, you have 60 inner discs out of a total of 100 squares. So that actually presents 60% of the board as compared to 50% of this inner discs on a 64 square board. So I would say that the key difference between 8 by 8 Othello and the 10 by 10 Othello, it's basically that the inner discs actually matter a little bit more compared to your usual. So in the traditional Othello, typically if you secure maybe three of the key edges within the blue border, I think you are more or less kind of firmed up that you have quite a majority of the discs, unless you lose a lot by tempo. But that usually isn't the case. But for 10 by 10 Othello, I would say that the battle is a lot more in the inner parts of the discs. So it's quite important to actually play maybe poison moves in order to create pockets of spaces for you to gain tempo. So I would say that the 10 by 10 Othello is almost exactly like the traditional Othello game, with the exception that it's now being played on a 10 by 10 board. Traditional opening books can still be a good start in terms of how you retain mobility. However, there might be slight differences due to the distance of it going to the edges. So I think edge play based openings might differ the most. Centralizing openings might differ lesser, perhaps. So yeah, the playing field becoming wider makes it a lot tougher to actually try to secure and stabilize discs. So I would say that in addition, the board being 10 by 10, there are a lot more moves to be played versus this 8 by 8 one. So you have 64 squares here with 4 squares occupied. Each player just needs to play 30 moves. And of course, for the 10 by 10, you have 96 squares to be played. Each player without a pass-up move will require to play up to 48 squares or 48 moves. So I would say that the game progress will be relatively slower. So when you play this particular variant, you need to be a little bit more patient. And yeah, basically just try to enjoy the game. It's somewhat different, but at the same time, there are players in Japan who plays this variant very seriously, almost as seriously as what they would play the traditional Othello. But I think this is a fun variant to play, and yeah, thank you very much for watching this video. And if you're interested to actually play all these Othello variants, just a reminder here that the AntiAutello.com is available. The link is in the description below. Just go ahead and register. And of course, do help me smash that like button and the subscribe button so that you'll never miss a video from the Othello Academy. Thank you very much for joining me. And this has been a partnership video between AntiAutello.com and Othello Academy. So signing off, Alex Cole. See you. Goodbye.